Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is a home interview in Woodstock, New York. It's the 28th of July, 2003, approximately 2:30 p.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
My name is Richard L. Clark, L like in Leslie, and I was born in Middleboro, Massachusetts, about 15 miles west of Plymouth and 30 miles south of Boston.
Okay. When were you born?
I was born on October 8, 1928.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering military service?
Well, I went through 1 year of high school, of course grammar school and all that, 1 year of high school, and then I transferred to a trade school. And I was there for 2.5 years, and then enlisted in the service. And after 3 years I come out of the service, I went back to high school and got my high school education, high school diploma.
Okay. Now you entered service in February of 1946.
Right.
Okay. Why did you join the service at that point?
Well, I was...
You enlisted?
I enlisted, okay. Yeah. I really kind of wanted to get away from home and the home environment. Wanted to get out of school, more or less. And yet, when I got into the service, I got a real good education in there. So it wasn't such a matter of getting away from school, but I guess it was getting away from the home environment. My older brother was in the 8th Air Force in England, and he was flying B-17s, got shot down, prisoner of war, and I kind of thought that I'd like to follow sort of in his footsteps.
Okay, so that's why you picked the Army
That's
Air
why I picked the Air Corps, right.
All right. Could you tell us about your time? You were in the Air Corps from 46 to 52. Could you tell us about your training and your experiences?
I went to I went to a place called Sac Field, San Antonio Aviation Cadet Center, which is now name's been changed. It's Lackland Air Force Base now. And that's where I took my basic, and after basic I was sent to Boca Raton, Florida. There was a radar school there in Boca Raton, and at that time it was all still kind of hush-hush, but I went through radar school there, went through the first 8 weeks, and they pulled me out, wanted me to be an instructor. So I went back to the first 4 weeks, and I taught as a lab instructor for a while until the CO wanted me to go into the classroom, be a classroom instructor. Well, all through school I abhorred getting up in front of a class of people and speaking. So I told him I didn't think I could do that, and he says, "You'll find a way." And he was a super guy. And the first probably 40 minutes in the classroom, I was a basket case. And after that, I've never had any problem getting up in front of a whole bunch of people and speaking. It just never bothered me after that. And I was an instructor for about 16 weeks, and then I got out of there, went back in and completed my other 8 weeks of the 16-week basic course. Then I took 4 weeks of advanced training and in radar, and then I went over to Germany.
Now, what was it like when the Army Air Force or Air Corps became the Air Force in 1947? Was there much of a transition? at that time?
I didn't notice a thing because we didn't change uniforms at that time. I was still wearing the OD Army uniform, and we had Air Force patch, and that was it.
Okay, while you were in occupied Germany, you participated in the Berlin Airlift?
Yes, I did.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, I was in an outfit that performed the 200-hour overhauls on the C-54 aircraft that they used in the airlift flying from Frankfurt to Berlin. And when the aircraft got accumulated 200 hours, they'd fly that airplane down to southern Germany, near Munich, and a base called Oberpfaffenhofen. And they would assign the crew that had accumulated a lot of airtime to fly down in that plane down to Obi base, and while the plane was being serviced, those guys went off to an R&R location where they just like had a vacation and a real good time. And after about 3 or 4 days, when the plane was ready, they'd call them up, they'd come back and fly the plane back into service up in Frankfurt, Rhine-Main.
Now, what did you have to do to overhaul one of these?
Well, we pulled all of the communication equipment out of the plane and took it into the shop, went through it with a fine-tooth comb, checking the functionality of everything, checking the tubes and checking all the circuitry, make sure that it was right up to snuff. And then we'd put it back in the airplane and write it off so that they could go back to service. It was a kind of a tough job in that the radio altimeters were all mounted down in the hold of the airplane, and there was an unbelievable amount of coal dust down there because a lot of the cargo that they hauled into Berlin was coal.
Okay. Do you have any other anecdotes or stories about you while you were in the Army of Occupation in Germany?
Well, when I first got to Bremerhaven, I stood on the deck of the ship. We hadn't debarked yet. I stood on the deck of the ship looking down, and there was a German train down there, and a little engine running back and forth, and it had a funny little high-pitched whistle on it. And I laughed at that thing, and I laughed and laughed until I climbed aboard. Then I didn't laugh anymore. I went from Bremerhaven down to a place called Marburg, which was a replacement depot, and stayed there a couple of days. From Marburg, I went on down to Munich, and I was in an air base called Munich Riem. I went back over there in the year 2000 in September, and went back to Munich Riem Air Base, and right where the main runway was, right now, is where the Autobahn goes through there. So everything has changed completely.
Okay. Now I noticed from the form you filled out, you said you were in the Air Force from 46 to 52, but then you overlapped the Signal Corps.
Well, I got out of the Air Force, in January of 49, and at the time I got out, I joined the reserve, and they called me back in 51. But I had been in an automobile accident. I had a compound fracture of the right leg, and they called me back, and I showed up at the base, Fort Devens, Mass. I showed up there in a cast and on crutches. Well, it's a funny thing. They never x-rayed my leg to verify that it was indeed broken. But they looked at me and said, "We don't want you," and they sent me home.
Okay. Now, you also said you were in the Massachusetts National Guard.
Yeah, I got out of the Signal Corps in '54, and in, I think it was '55, no, '56. '56 it was. My brother-in-law wanted me to go back into the National Guard because for summer camp they needed a commo chief, communications chief. So I had radio and wire experience, so I enlisted in there. But I went to summer camp and I was commo chief. The original guy that had been commo chief, he had some kind of bad accident, and they didn't think he was ever going to be able to come back again. Well, he did come back, and it was a combination of things. My manager in my civilian job needed me for a lot of overtime, and I couldn't participate with the National Guard working overtime. And that, in combination with the fact that the old commo chief and I didn't get along at all, I finally got discharged. They turned me loose because they said I couldn't participate. And that was about 1957, I think it was, that I got out. And I was out. I had a 22-year break in service. And by that time, civilian life and everything, and I was shooting in competition. And I went down to West Point and met a full bird colonel down at West Point. He said, "I'll pay you to shoot. I'll pay you mileage to get there, issue your ammunition, and give you retirement credits." So I said, "How long?" And he says, "Oh, you can sign up for a year." So normally it's 3, and I said, "I'll split the difference. I'll go for 2. I went for 2, and everything he said was true. I was having a lot of fun. I was shooting better, and everything was going great. So I re-enlisted for 3 years. When the 3 years was up, I went for 6, and then, frankly, just before the 6 years was up, I found out I had diabetes. I knew I couldn't pass the physical, so I extended without a physical. So then when I got to be 60 years old, they threw me out, mandatory retirement age, but they didn't give me a 20-year letter. So the following year, I went out to St. Louis and talked with them out there, and the girl out there said, "Well, looks like you've only got 19 and a half years of service." And I said, "Wait a minute. I know there was an Army reg. I don't know the name or the number of it, but I know it existed. It said if I was in the reserve prior to the 1st of July, 1950, that's good time, regardless of activity." And she says, "That's right." And she rattled off the name and the number of the Army reg. She looked at my record. She says, "You were in the reserve from the end of January 49 until 1st of July 50. That gives you 21 years. And she put through all the paperwork, and I was retired from service with a ID card and with pay.
What rank did you retire as?
E7. But when that full bird colonel got me back in, he told me, he says, there was a recruitment drive at that time. He says, and the way to sneak through town without being seen is to walk through on the fringes of a riot. And he gave me my old rank back. And then he promoted me after that.
How well did you do in pistol competition for the Army?
I made pistol distinguished. I got 4 points toward rifle distinguished, but by the time I tried to make the transition from pistol to rifle, I was too old. My eyesight was gone. I could do fairly well at 200 yards, pretty good at 300, and surprisingly well at 400. But when I got back to 600 yards, I shot a group like that, which was out of the contest.
How do you think your time in service affected your life?
Oh, I think it affected my life in a great manner. It was good for me. I grew up when I enlisted in the service. I found out things that I hadn't known before, and I matured quite a lot. I've had a lot of really good experiences in the service.
I see you went to working in electronics at IBM. Do you think you would have been involved in electronics if it wasn't for the military?
Oh no. More than likely not. I don't know what I would have done. Probably mechanic. I have mechanical aptitude. In fact, well, my mother got sick at the end of my basic training, and I went home on an emergency leave. While I was home, my name came up on orders to go to clerk typist school in Colorado, carpenter's school in Fort Lewis, Washington, machinist school in St. Louis, Scott Field, St. Louis, Missouri. I was away and couldn't make any of those orders. When I got back, lo and behold, I lucked out because they sent me to radar school.
Okay. Did you join any veterans organizations?
I do belong to the VFW post here in Woodstock, and for years I've been the adjutant up here.
Did you stay in contact with anyone that you were in service with?
Well, that's a funny thing, because while in the reserve, they sent me to Rock Island, Illinois, to armorer school for the 45 and the M14 National Match rifle. And while out there, I lived right across the street from a library. I had the opportunity to go over to the library where they had every phone book in the state of Iowa, in Davenport, Iowa. So I looked up this guy that I had been in Naples with, and his name, he had a strange name, Alan W. Crotts, C-R-O-T-T-S. And I found a couple of Crotts in some vague little small town in the central Iowa, and I knew that's where he was from. So I called out there and left a message. The lady called me back on her nickel, and she told me that Alan was out in California somewhere. She didn't know where, but his brother was in Phoenix. So I called his brother, and I asked for Alan. His brother was kind of, he was kind of short with me, and I told him that I had been in the service with Alan, and so he called up Alan and gave him the number. Alan called me right back at the hotel in Davenport, and we got together, and we saw each other a couple times after that. But now we've drifted apart, and I don't know where in the world he is. Another thing, I was a ham radio operator at the time. I was in the Signal Corps in '52, and I had a good buddy in there in Virginia, So one day I was over in Ham headquarters in Connecticut and visiting a friend of mine. He had a computer terminal on his desk, and I said, "What do you use the computer for?" "Oh," he says, "one of the things is we have an FCC copy of the FCC database online." So I says, "Can you find a Ham if you know his name and don't know his call?" "Oh, sure." I says, "How about Lowry, James M.?" He typed in James M. Lowry, got 2 hits. And one was in DeLand, Florida, and the other one was in Phoenix. So I started writing this stuff down on each one of these guys. I was going to write him a letter. He said, "Well, how old was this guy that you know?" I said, "Gee, I don't know." "Well," he says, "the guy in Phoenix was born in 1921. The guy in DeLand, Florida was born in 1929. Bingo. So I wrote down the information. I got home, I called information on the telephone. I got his number, and I called him up. Instantly, as soon as he answered the phone, I recognized his voice. And I says, "Jim?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Who is this?" I says, "Dick Clark." There was silence for maybe 5 seconds. And then he said, "Who?" I laughed right out loud and I said, "Jim, were you stationed in Virginia in 1952? He says, "That Dick Clark." And we've been good buddies ever since. I saw that guy last in February this year. And we're going down in May of next year. May because, well, I'd rather go in the cold months up here to get away from the snow. But May in Orlando next year is a reunion of the guys that were in the Berlin Airlift.
Oh.
So I joined the Berlin Airlift Association, and I'm going to go to that.
Okay, now do you have some things you brought that you want to show us?
Well, I was wondering if you wanted to ask me any questions about what I had here. I've got, what have I got? I got certificate of promotion, which that was my...
Well, if you hold that up to the camera,
one.
Wayne can...
Okay.
Now, do you still shoot pistols?
I still shoot, but I don't shoot anything other than .22 right now. My scores have dropped off because my hand shakes a little bit and my eyes aren't as good as they used to be. So,
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
okay, now, one of the things I have here.
Now, do you have any pictures of yourself in uniform at all?
Oh, I thought you'd never ask. I've got that in here somewhere. Here, hang on. That was right out of my 201 file.
Where'd you have that picture taken?
What? When?
Where?
It was taken at West Point, as I recall. 880706. That must have been July 6th.
Okay, got it.
Either June 7th or July 6th. I don't know how they figure that. And I have here my distinguished pin. And I have my my battle ribbons.
Okay, great. Got it.
Well, let's see. What else I
Now,
got?
do you want to explain to us how you got that distinguished pin?
Oh, sure. To to become distinguished, you have to accumulate 30 points. And you get points by competing on an army or a brigade basis. Now my first match was brigade basis, and I only get 4 points for brigade competition. So I won that match and I got 4 points, and I did that in '76. I didn't get any more points until about 1980 down in Fort Meade, Maryland, when I got 8 points. That gave me 12. In order to get points, you must compete and end up being in the top 10% of all the competitors. And then, if you're within the bottom third of that 10%, you get 6 points. In the middle third, you get 8 points. In the top third, you get 10 points. So, I got 4 points for brigade, then I got 8 points at Fort Meade. I got 10 points in a civilian match, and then I went back to Fort Meade the following year and got another 8 points. And it gave me 30 points, and I got the distinguished badge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to show us?
Yeah, I got a couple things here. I got an Army Commendation Medal, and I can show these probably both at once. Army Commendation Medal and a Certificate of Retirement.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. Okay, now I don't know if there's anything
What's that
else.
large picture?
That large picture is a picture that I had taken when I was in Naples, Italy, and sent home to, at that time, was my girlfriend.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, you might want to see this. There's 2 generations of Army.
Okay.
My son and I.
All right.
When did your son serve?
He went in 46. In fact, no, not 46, 76. In fact, he went in a few months before I did. In after my 22-year break, we went in together. He went to basic training in Fort Dix, and I used to go down there and shoot at that time. So the drill sergeant caught him waving at me when I drove by, and the drill sergeant told him that he certainly shouldn't have any of his family down there, you know, and dropped down and give me 10. And then he said, "How come your father's down here?" He says, "Oh, he's in the reserve. He's down here shooting with the team." And, oh, that made the guy feel bad, so, for punishing him. And then he said, if your father can show up over here, he says, I'll let you see him for a few minutes. So they contacted me at the range and told me to stop by, and I did. And saw my boy for a few minutes and shook hands with his drill sergeant. My son was in the airborne, which I was pretty proud about that, you know. And I went down to Fort Benning to shoot with the team, and I went over to the jump school and saw one of the E7s over there who was an instructor on the towers, where they jumped from the towers. And I said to the instructor, I had a son down here last October. Oh, what was his name? I said, Bob Clark. He says, oh, I don't recognize that name. I pulled out my wallet, showed him a picture. He looked at the picture, his eyes got big, and he saw it. Oh, he says, Disaster Clark, I remember him.
Now, you said you also now have a granddaughter that's in Iraq.
Yes.
With the Army.
Her father was never in the service, but her uncle, two uncles were, and of course I was. Now she's over in Baghdad.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your interview.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure.